Murphy, 101 Maple Lane, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Interview conducted by Dr. Charles Johnson, University of Tennessee, Center for the Study of War and Society. Interview on Tuesday, April 13th, 1993. Just ask about sort of how you went into the service, why you decided, if you decided, what branch you were in, and the early training, and just sort of carry it all the way through the war. And I mostly listen and ask a few questions. I've got some ideas as to how I want it to go. But when did you join the service?
I joined right after Pearl Harbor. I graduated in 41. And
graduated from?
University of Tennessee.
UT.
Now, it's amazing how I got down here, but that's another story. And I got commissioned one day, graduated the next, got married the next.
A busy week.
Sure, and I took off to L.A. I had decided, I saw the war coming, everybody did. Decided to be smart to have at least a year under my belt of civilian experience in case I lived through it.
Yeah.
Give me an edge up on everybody looking for a job. Well, I graduated in engineering, and I went to work for Lockheed out in L.A., actually in Burbank, but we lived in Hollywood, and we had a ball out there, just going to every place we heard on the radio, that when Pearl Harbor hit, I walked in and told them I'm going on active duty. They said, no way, we got you blocked. I said, watch me. For February, I was on active duty. In August, I was on my way to England.
That's quick. You joined from California then?
From Hollywood is what my address was. I went to, I got two sets of orders, and I took the one that sent me to Fort Leonard Wood.
Okay.
And I was put in a 2-month reserve for refresher training, and it was rough. They worked us about 14 hours a day in everything you can think of, from bayonet training to rifle range to bridging, the whole ring-a-ding-ding.
You'd been through the ROTC program.
Oh, yes.
UT,
Yes, that's
and,
where I'd gotten my second lieutenancy.
Right. Was the ROTC training valuable to you? I don't know much about ROTC.
Yes, it was excellent, although it was almost a refresher. You see, I went to military school from the time I was 5 until the time I was 18. My father had been killed in World War I. My mother died in a flu epidemic right after World War I. So I was just an orphan. The estate was pretty good, and it took me through military school. An unusual military school, it's no longer military, called McDonough. It's up in Maryland, and the history on it, if you don't mind. History on it is quite amazing. This guy, John McDonough, was from Baltimore. He went to New Orleans and became quite wealthy. He was enamored of a planter's daughter who the family just said he wasn't the kind of man they wanted their daughter to marry. He died a bachelor. He left half of his money to New Orleans, which founded the public schools there. Up until that time, there had been only parochial schools. And half to Baltimore for a school for orphans. And he didn't decree that it would be military, but that was a good way to go about it. It was a farm, school, military. Had their own farm, which the boys worked some on, but mostly on punishment tours. So I had a military influence.
Yeah.
In fact, I had taken the exam. If your father, or I think it's a relative, has been killed during war, you can take an exam that's called the presidential exam, and if you can meet the mental qualifications, then you're automatically given an appointment to West Point. Well, I'd shot expert there at military school, had no idea that my right eye did not meet the 20/20 requirements. And it was a real kick in the butt when I found out that then you had to have 20/20 without correction. Now, my God, you can have anything. So I was disappointed as hell. So I went to work. It was too late to get into any college. So I went to work for Western Electric down in Point Breeze in Baltimore for a year as a millwright apprentice. At the end of that year, I knew damn well I didn't want to be a millwright or have anything more to do with that kind of business. So I decided I'd become an engineer. I'd saved up, I think I had less than $100. That was all that was going to come. I mean, in 29, cleaned out my estate. So I went into their personnel and asked them how they rated the various engineering schools. I mean, what the hell? If I'm going to be an engineer, let's go to a good one if I can work my way through. And the top of the list was Rensselaer, and then came Georgia Tech, MIT, Caltech, the whole bit. And down about 10 was the first university I saw, University of Tennessee. So the personnel director got interested in my case and said, just send your resume and write a letter and say, what about me coming down there and working my way through? Old Dean Massey was the dean of students then, and he wrote back a very nice letter, said, yes, come right ahead. He was impressed with my resume and said, we'll help you find work. So that's the way I came to the University of Tennessee.
And the ROTC program was mandatory, or?
It was mandatory for the first 2 years, and then it was optional to take the advance, and the advance led to the second lieutenancy in reserve.
But it was logical for you with your background.
It was just actually a repeat of most of what I had done.
And
So,
then you repeated it again when you got to Leonard Wood.
Leonard Wood, but that was they showed it to us from the underside, you might say. We built bridges and laid mines and lifted mines, and so that we were. The only thing that I regret is that all the mines were oak slabs, and anti-tank warfare was against trucks, and the whole bit. So there was really very little equipment in those days.
Right.
So
were you in that training? You were attached to a training company, or
it was a training unit, a total training unit, and there were 10. That time the year they were segregated, and there was enlisted training going on simultaneously. We were not involved in that until after we finished up our 2 months. And those days it was segregated. They had 10 white companies and 10 black companies. And in fact, after I graduated, I was given command of what they called the 8-Ball Company. It was the black company. It was the 11th company, and it was all the discontents and malcontents of those 10 companies.
Not a
Not what
particularly
you'd call-
outstanding group.
No, but surprisingly, with them pretty well. And we turned out a whistling drill team that was sent all around the country. Not a word spoken. It started with the first sergeant. The way I picked the first sergeant, I walked down the line the first day. They were the dirtiest, ugliest looking bunch of people you ever saw. Lips stuck out and tummy stuck out. Then about halfway down the second platoon, and here was about a 6'2", rigid standing, good-looking black boy from Birmingham. I said, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Birmingham, son." And I said, "You're the first sergeant. I'm going to leave here. I'll be back in 2 hours. I want your stripes on. I want this outfit clean and stand at attention when I come back." I deliberately came from the back of the company, so he didn't see me. He couldn't pull any pasty on me. He was up there, and he was walking up and down in front of the company. He had his stripes on and had them with X's. It's not the normal, just a stitch, they fit. And I caught the last part of his speech. I don't know what the front of it was, but he said, pointing to the stripes, he says, "This says I's the first sergeant." And he says, "The white man, he says I's the first sergeant." And he rolled up a arm that was about as big as my thigh and says, "This says I's the first sergeant. And you niggers want to argue about it?" They were standing there like that. We got on beautifully. And suddenly I got orders to go to Camp Landing to join the 1st Infantry Division. Hell, I didn't even know what the 1st Infantry Division was at that time. And they had just come back from maneuvers in Louisiana, which you probably heard what a debacle that was. Then we got orders from Camp Landing. I was given a platoon there. Most of the men were from up east. Their original home was up in Devon, Fort Devon. I've forgotten where in the hell it is, somewhere up east. Massachusetts. So that a lot of them were New Yorkers, and they had that Yankee twanky. Anyway, we went from there to Fort Benning for air-ground maneuvers.
Now, this was an engineering company?
No, engineering battalion.
Okay.
It was the infantry division consists of at that time it was triangular, and I think it still is. 3 infantry regiments, an engineer battalion, 3 artillery battalions, quartermaster, ordnance, signal, and medical. And they could break down in what was known as regimental combat teams, which were self-sufficient teams. And that way, they got the 1 regiment of infantry, battalion of artillery. There were 4 battalions. There was a 155 battalion at division troops, and a company of engineers. Well, that put the company commander of an engineer company in a real peculiar situation. Here he was, the sole commander of those troops. Usually the infantry colonel knew very little about engineer troops, and just considered and combat engineers, fight as infantry. They're trained as infantry as well as demolition, mine warfare, bridging, the whole ring-a-ding-ding. So you have 104 powers you can make and break officers. That's the commander, you might say, and you're responsible for the whole mess, supply, the whole bit. You don't have anything like you do when you're back in a battalion formation.
Right. How large was an engineer company then? 300, 200?
No, it was more like 200.
200, like an infantry.
A little smaller than an infantry company, and I think it was 184 or something like that. Then there was a 10% overage that they gave you if you were slated for overseas. So I worked it out. We had 3 platoons of 50 men each, and then a headquarters company, which took care of my supply and the whole ring, all the administrative aspects.
These were pretty good troops, you think, at the beginning?
They were surprisingly good. They really were. Now, you ran across a certain number that were belligerent, and some of the foulest-mouthed men you ever heard in your life.
Even for the Army?
Even for the Army. Every other word was one of the 4-letter words. But they worked well. They did a good job on bridging. We were just beginning to learn something about the Bailey Bridge. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. And, of course, we had built just rough timber trestle and that sort of thing. They worked well, and they paraded very well. Of course, I worked the pants off of them when I took over because they looked a little rough around the edges. After we left Benning for those air ground, we had 1 man killed in those air ground maneuvers. The planes weren't that accurate. And one of those things.
Man in your company?
Yes. Not in my platoon, but in my I was a platoon commander then. Now we went from there to Indiantown Gap. That was a staging area, and that was a wildest bunch of mess. We painted crates and foot lockers. One day we'd paint them with a certain insignia on it, and 2 days later we had to completely paint that over and put a new insignia on it. Nobody could make up their minds. I'm painting the disarray that this outfit was in. This was the U.S. Army, and it's really something. Well, they sent out an advance detail, and my company commander was sent out on the advance detail, a fellow by the name of Larry Anderson, who incidentally stayed in, retired a bird colonel. Hell of a nice guy. He also had gotten his Ph.D. in rocket engineering. I didn't know there was such a thing. He was down at Huntsville. Anyway, the whole damn division was put on the Queen Mary. Now, can you imagine? 15,000 troops on one damn ship. The mess lines were continuous. They got 2 meals a day. She ran by herself, no escort because she was so fast. She changed course about every 2-3 minutes. We didn't know. And we got up in the North Atlantic. Would you believe I saw waves come over the funnel of that damn thing? Everybody was seasick. I happened from being up in Maryland around Chesapeake. I'm not seasick. I remember one time I went to the officers' mess. Ordinarily it's about 500 officers. 5 of us showed up for breakfast.
That must have been pretty scary to people who've never seen the ocean before.
Oh boy, the rails were lined with people. They couldn't care if they lived or died. I'll tell you, they were that sick. You know, you see people that are seasick, they really don't care about anything except getting rid of that feeling. Well, we made it in 6 days and came in at Glasgow, actually Gorick, which is a port, and I guess we were about the first troops in England. And at first we got these new helmets, you know, type it, and they were still wearing the dishpan type. At first, some of the troops, some of the people thought we were German because those helmets resembled the German helmets. Well, we stayed in England at a post, it had been an old cavalry post, called Tidworth. And very nice post. The only thing was it was based on battalion mess and not on company mess, and so we had to make those changes. Then, all around, I guess it was around the early part of November, we went south and started practicing landing maneuvers. And of course, they were all British landing boats. They were all wooden boats, and they'd drop us off in the middle of nowhere. All that was night. The landings then were done at night, and that water was icy cold. And they'd bring you in. You had no idea where in the hell you were, and the ramp would go down, and you might go in the water up to here. Supposedly, you would be able to walk ashore. We had those old canvas leggings, you know, and you were wet, cold, and miserable. And usually there was a foul up in the morning. We were supposed to get to a certain point, assembly point, and you had no idea where you were. No, dark as the inside of a hat, and there were trails there. If you stepped off a trail, you'd go up in the mud like this. This was sort of mountainous country in Scotland, and I was certainly glad when we finished. We'd have one of these landings, and we'd go back. We might not even get on the same ship. I think The ship I came home on was a 33rd troop ship I'd been on, so you can get an idea what a mess things were. Well, then we finally loaded up and headed out toward Africa. We had no idea where in the hell we were going. The rumor had it we were going to Madagascar, and I couldn't figure out what in the hell we would be doing in Madagascar. I think this was one that was officially released.
Yeah.
So we did, of course, made the turn into Gibraltar.
Had Terry Allen sort of put his mark on the division by
Yes,
then?
he had. He was the best liked commander that we ever had.
Why do you think that was the case?
Well, I've tried to analyze that. He made it a point to visit every damn company in the division. Now, that is rare. He wanted to see them. Actually, every company put on a parade for him. So it wasn't a regimental or a battalion parade, it was a company parade. So he saw the ins and outs. He made an inspection. I guess he saw every man in that division. That's one thing. He tangled early with several of the commanders. There was one commander, I can't think of his name. When we first got to Africa, he built himself an underground palace. And we never even knew he was there. This was a Corps commander. Friedendahl, that was he. Anyway, as you know, the African invasion had the British on the east and the 1st Division at the center, and then they had Patton with the 2nd Armored on the west.
What was the particular task of your company?
My company was given the mission of completely disarming, or at least keep this coast artillery fort completely out of business. And we managed to catch them with their britches down, sound asleep, and they had no problems whatsoever.
A lot of shooting?
No. I think actually the only shooting is we caught them, they had underground barracks, and the officer in charge came out with about 6 men. The initial group there, the sentries were easily overpowered. The initial group there that was in a separate bunker just gave up immediately. But the officer came out firing his pistol, and a couple of rounds from the... We had already set the charges on the coast artillery guns to smash their breeches. And when he came out firing, just before that was time to go off, when it went off, boy, they just threw away everything he could. They thought they were getting incoming artillery.
Well timed.
So everything worked very well.
This was
no
in
problem.
Oran?
Arzu was where we landed.
You were in Arzu.
Yeah, we came across to see the one regiment landed at Arzu. Another regiment landed, Mustaqim, I think was the name. Came across the mountains to Oran. And of course, the target was Oran.
Yeah.
And the other was kept in reserve, which followed. I happened to be with the one that went at Arzu, and we came on through. We had a good fight at St. Cloud, and I lost about 7 or 8 men there. You never knew. You'd go through one little town, they'd be giving you wine and throwing flowers at you, go in the next and be met by artillery fire.
Depending on the mind of the commander.
Whoever was in charge. And what we met in St. Cloud was the famous ragtail army. What the hell's the name of the...
What, the Legion?
Yeah, the Foreign Legion.
Well, they'll fight anybody.
They fight anybody. They didn't care. And I went to their headquarters later, and boy, that's a hell of a life. There's no romance in the Foreign Legion. Don't let anybody fool you. They They pay them next to nothing, and they discharge them out in the hinterlands when they run out. You know, their enlistment runs out. They discharge them out in the hinterlands, and they have practically no money. And the Arabs just prey on them, and so they get right back into the Foreign Legion again. And that's the way it's set. A lot of their officers, most of them were French, but there were a lot of German officers. And I ran into a guy who had been a deserter from the 1st Infantry Division in World War I.
Really?
In the Foreign Legion. He was now a sergeant. He was grizzled. I think they just kept him on because he had put in so many years. He wasn't really doing anything. But you want more a picture of where we went and from then on?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, things were beginning to gel in the East with the British 8th. They had several good battles, and now they were squeezing the Germans to the point that they were pushing west. There was the British First Army, which was thin as just a thin line. They had a lot of French under that First Army, and they were still pulling cannon with mules. So you can tell what sort of armament is against the Germans. That was nothing. Well, when we were moved to Selcha. This is in, let's see, we left.
Landed in November.
Landed in November, and this was in the winter. No, it must have been around January. You know, you got so you didn't pay attention to the calendar. You paid attention to where you were, the towns. And this was up in the mountains, and we were in 3 inches of snow.
Real surprise for people who thought Africa was the desert.
I mean, we had no idea. In fact, when we were first issued uniforms, we were issued the OD and wool uniform, and it was gas impregnated, stiff as a board. And we couldn't figure out what in the hell are we doing going south with wool OD uniforms. But it sure did come in handy up there in New Selcha. From there we went on over, and I guess the first, we were committed piecemeal by this British First, and we had no supply, no artillery, and there were tanks against us. No communication with the next headquarters. The next officer up the line may be French, who spoke no English. And then above him was English, and they weren't communicating. So we were getting the hell knocked out of us. Well, Allen demanded that the division be able to fight as a unit. And the first attack we had, Americans against Germans, and we were against a Panzer division in Gala. And that was very, very successful. The Germans, the ones that were not killed or captured, took off north and left an Italian battalion in a old Roman fort that was about a half mile east of Gala. And we were to attack that the next day. It was a night attack. My company had prepared the road from Fariana to Gala, and we were under constant air attack. Lost, I guess, 6 or 8 trucks. Very few actual casualties, though. The Germans had mined that road, and almost methodically, about every half mile had blown a crater. And of course the sand there was very slow travel, even with the 4-wheel, until we put in Sommerfeld track. I don't know whether that means anything. It's a type of steel mesh track that we had used in beach landings.
Sort of like Marston matting for an air...
Similar, only not as heavy. So we put that as bypasses around these blown areas. And it took us a month to get within where we would start getting fire from Gala. to get that. And then it was a real good. They had a whole combat command, as I remember, from the 1st Armored Division, which they had Sherman tanks then too. They didn't have the big priests. You remember the priest tanks? We had Sherman tanks. And then 2 regiments abreast and 1 in reserve. And of course the engineer were spread with each of the regiment combat teams. So at once my company had prepared the road, we were just in reserve waiting in case he needed. And it was a night attack. And of course, there's no way you're going to know whether you need engineer troops or not until daylight. But by daylight, they had that town pretty well cleaned up, except for this Italian unit. And often the Germans did this. We found this out. They even in Sicily. What they'd do would blow a bridge and leave an Italian unit to cover it, and then they'd go on to blow another one. Anyway, when we were put in reserve, I was with the 16th Regiment then, and it had a company of gooms attached to it. Have you ever heard of gooms? Well, their reputation was pretty rough. The officer in command of it, that company was attached to my company. And the officer in command came to me and said that he was under my command, but had been ordered to make a recon that night of this fort for the best means of entry. And I said, well, that's good. I said, I've heard about you people. I'd like to go on that recon. He said, I wouldn't advise it, Capitan. He said, these people are rather primitive, and they're trained as silent killers from childhood. Says they cut the throat of every other sentry and take his left ear. And the French army gives them 1,000 francs for those left ears, except that they don't turn them in. They dry them in the sun and wear them around their neck as a necklace, and they gamble with them. I've seen them gambling with them. I've seen as many as 200-300 ears piled up, like dollars. So I said, well, what time are you going to go out? And he said, well, if you're at my headquarters at 2100, as I'll have Ahmed take you in. Well, these guys moved like smoke. I went out, and Sergeant Ahmed was in command. He spoke no English, and I spoke very little French, so we used hand signals. They were only armed with a long curved knife, which you hung at the hip. And they had a little goatskin bag on the left hip. That was for the ears. Well, he warned me. He said, now, if you, this was Lefebvre was his name, he says, if they think you might give away their position, they won't hesitate to cut your throat. And he really didn't want me to go with this group, but I went. Well, sure enough, they split, and I didn't even know when they left. He had 8 other goons with him. I kept to the left of him, plenty of distance, so if he was going to come after me, I was going to at least protect myself. Had no arms myself. I'd take off my helmet because, the wind sometimes makes the sounds seem different. And take off my leggings and pulled wool socks over my shoes and tied them down good. And took off my pistol belt with canteens and, a whole mess of compass, first aid. That's the thing that would make the most noise. So I felt sort of naked. And he put one of these curved knives on me, and the fever did. We took off.
Have you ever asked yourself why you went?
I wanted to find out. Yeah, in fact, my executive officer asked me that. And he said he didn't think it was a good idea. I said, well, I want to find out. The last time we'd had a night reconnaissance, hell, you could have held my troops 100 yards away. I wanted to find out their methods. How did they move so quietly? And you couldn't hear them. Started out with 8. There was Ahmed and me to his left, and then 7 behind. I never knew when they left. So, well, we tracked down a sentry. The way he worked, he only moved when the sentry moved. And he matched his steps with his steps, so I, of course, copied him. And he picked up a rock when he was about 10 yards behind the sentry. He threw that rock, then ran and launched himself so that his knee hit the middle of the sentry's back, and his left hand snaked around, and he jerked that back, and then there'd be a flash of the knife, and it was all over. You never heard a sound. He just eased the body down. And then he'd take his foot. Oh, they were barefoot. They wore French wrapped leggings. They used the OD French uniform. No helmet. And he'd ease that helmet off with his toe, and you'd see a knife flash, and he'd put a dripping ear in the bag. So, and we started off again. We saw the next sentry, and we went back toward Gasser to miss him because their scheme was to scare hell out of people. So they only cut the throat to every other sentry, leaving it obvious that they could have done it to everyone. But that was a scare tactic. Now what got in my guts is on the 3rd sentry, he picked up a rock and he put it in my hand. So I caught, that was the first time I'd ever cut a man's throat in my life, and I'm telling you, it is not a pleasant situation. That blood just gushes out, and if you've ever seen a pig sticking, and the smell is horrible. Of course, you're scared to death you're going to goof up. Not that you're really afraid of, well, you could have, if we had been caught, there's hell, we'd had a mortar fire on us. But I was more afraid I was going to goof up than anything else. So, and then I thought, well, after we got those sentries, we would make a reconnaissance of fort. Ahmed turned and started trotting back toward Gasser. Figure what was going on. I thought, well, maybe Lefevre has told him to teach me, and the rest of the sentries are going to recon the entrance. I never knew when they joined us. And we swung way around my company's area, so we weren't hailed by any of my sentries. We got into this pyramidal tent where Lefevre had his headquarters, and they spoke in French. And then the goons left. And I said, this was a fucking farce. We never got near the... I realized then that the guns hadn't ended. He said, hadn't gotten near any recons at all. He gave me a half cup of cognac. He said, you're going to need this. Said I did the first time I went out. He could tell from the blood on my right sleeve that I dispatched one of them. And he said, we never intended to. Said, we take the military order and or make a recon or do whatever. Said, but we know what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to scare them. Says, tomorrow, that Italian unit will be heading north. There won't be a shot fired. And he was right. They had the reputation, I don't know how true it was, that they had gotten into an Italian unit at night, had captured the commander and taken him out of the unit. It wasn't discovered until the next day. So the Italians were scared to death of him. Well, after we took Gala, I practiced.
The Italians did take off.
Oh yeah, the next morning, hell, I woke up after drinking that cognac. I had that bed sack. I didn't even bother to wash up. I was out. Woke up the next morning with a good headache, but heard from the radio, the artillery woke me up. They caught them in the open heading north, and they just slaughtered them. They didn't even bother to take their arms. They just ran. All vehicles, threw away their weapons, and they were just heading north. They didn't want any more part of these goons. After that, we reassembled as a full division and went into El Qatar. Oh, you've probably heard all about that.
No, go ahead. I'd like to see your perspective on it.
Well, it was the first time we met a full Panzer division with tanks. Surprisingly, at Gala there were no tanks, and they had no artillery either. I don't know what in the world the Germans were thinking about. I guess they just assumed there would be no attack. They were just blocked. Anyway, at El Qatar we met the top notch. Patton was in command of the attack. He was a corps commander then. And
Yeah, Friedendahl had been replaced.
yes, he had been. Patton was now the corps commander in place of Friedendahl, and it was smooth as silk. It really was. We were back on a set of sort of dunes, and it was a big open valley in front of us. And here came the Germans with their tanks. Well, we'd put in a minefield, about 200-300 yards out front, all the way across that whole valley. And when the first tank, well, first the artillery got them. Our artillery, of course, we had 3 battalions of 105s and 1 battalion of 155, and then we had this combat command of, they had the whole First Armored Division. They were making recons out. We had a gap there at the road, and my troops were out there to put the mines back in as soon as the recons came back. But it was just an open valley. Well, the 9th Division was to our right up on a series of bluffs that ran out to the right, which would be to the south. And they didn't even send any infantry into it. It was all there, but they only used their artillery. So we were getting them with artillery from the west and from the south. And as soon as they hit that minefield, these were Mark 6 tanks too, the big Tigers. And I don't know whether you've ever seen one of those things or not. They're huge. Their treads are about that.
I didn't realize they had the Mark 6 there that early.
They had it. No problems at all. They quit cold. We got lots and lots of prisoners. From there, we made a 500-mile run north.
Before you head through that, 1st Division was not involved in the Kasserine Pass?
Yes, that was part of that being committed.
Oh, in piecemeal. Yeah, okay.
With no protection. They were here were infantry soldiers, no artillery, facing tanks. Now, these weren't the Mark 6, but they were the Panzers.
Yeah, 3 and 4.
Right. I mean, hell, there's just no way they could have done anything. And it was the 26th Infantry, 1 battalion and 26th Infantry Regiment. And they broke and ran. Well, what the hell? You got tanks coming at you. You got an M1 rifle. That's it. What are you going to do?
Yeah, your unit was not involved.
My unit was not involved.
Okay, so after El Qatar, you
went north, heading toward Bizerta. That was the port that the Germans were using for supply, and we just trucked and just ran relays of trucks until we got the whole division. See, the 1st was not a motorized unit, although the engineers were totally motorized. There's no problem for us. And there was skirmish after skirmish, and then between the British First Army, and by that time the 8th had come all the way through. They had met us at Tebessa, which was a big supply. They had been putting in a big supply compound there to take care of the 8th when it came in, because their lines were stretched clear back to God knows where.
Alexandria. Almost.
Yeah. So after that, it really wasn't too long before the whole damn German army in North Africa just gave up. And then our responsibility was to build these, I don't know what you call them, just big areas to take care of the prisoners.
Well-disciplined prisoners.
Extremely well disciplined. They do exactly what they were told, and under their officers they maintained the thing, and there didn't appear to be any resentment between the enlisted ranks and the officers, which we later ran into. Well then,
The division, first division, had a reputation of fighting hard, and then once the combat was over, then they were not perhaps as disciplined.
They were a rowdy bunch. And I got to the point where I had 2 types of NCOs. I had combat NCOs. As soon as we got out of combat, they'd get drunk or get rowdy or get into fights, and I'd bust them. Put my garrison type NCOs in charge. Well, when we got back in combat again, the combat NCOs functioned so much better that they would be, even though you had a garrison NCO in charge of the squad as a platoon sergeant, your combat NCO was actually directing it under the officers. And excellent officers all the way through. Had one who I later made in engineer company is a funny deal. Originally, we had no executive officer. We had what they called an administrative officer. He was surprised, handled the duties of supply, administration, motor pool, etc. Well, I made him an executive officer and second in command, because that way, just like in the infantry company, in the engineer company, the administrative officer was considered the lowest ranking lieutenant. And the second in command was the first platoon commander. And that didn't work too well. I copied and as a separate commander, I could pretty well do what I wanted to do. So I made him an exec.
Yeah, this was your company, by
My company only. Yeah. Well, after that situation, we were all ordered back to Iran. And there wasn't enough transportation to get the whole unit back to Iran. And by this time, we were talking about a corps. The 9th Division, the 1st Armored, 1st Infantry, and I think there was one other division that didn't, 36.
36.
Yeah. I really didn't know what the hell they were doing. That brings us back to the idea that you really have a very narrow view of what's going on. Even as much latitude as I had to move all over the area, I rarely knew anything more than what my regimental combat team was doing. And that became very, very obvious in Normandy, because we got out 50 miles ahead of the surrounding divisions. And any flank attack on us would have mummied us. But you get this narrow picture. You know what the hell's going on around you, and you even though you've got pretty good communication, it's not exact. And that brings me to one I'd like to talk about. Always have. I read about civilians getting totally irate about troops being killed by friendly fire. And it's brought about by this very thing I'm talking about. And it's going to happen as long as there are armies. We laid up, this was in Sicily, we laid up Easter morning for 4 hours. Luckily we were dug in under our own 155 fire. I set up very signals according to the SOI. I would say lift fire. I sent up, I think it was green that day. I sent up, ended all my very ammunition, and still kept coming in. I had 2 men killed and 1 man wounded. What are you going to do about that? Nothing I don't know. It's going to happen. First place, if you've got green troops, it happens very often. For instance, I remember later on, let's see, this was just before the Battle of the Bulge, in fact, they would say. Brazilian, I didn't even know we had any Brazilian troops, but there was a Brazilian division right next to this black division. It was 101st, I think, was the black. I'm not sure.
90,
maybe it was a
93rd, 92nd.
Could have been. But they were side by each. The Brazilian division would send members of probably combat team, would send out a patrol. They'd get lost. They'd come back to the black division and they'd get annihilated. I mean, nobody, they couldn't. I doubt that the blacks would know what Spanish or Portuguese was from German. And the blacks would send out a patrol. They'd get lost, come back to the Brazilian division, and they'd get annihilated. Now, what do you do with things like that?
It happens.
And you better be prepared to accept it. And it's just part of the nasty mess called war. And don't ever kid yourself, it is a nasty mess. And if you're in it up to your eyebrows. Nothing you can do about it, except get prepared to accept it. Now, how are you going to prepare the civilians for that sort of thing?
Just try to tell them the truth in peacetime, I guess.
Nobody's made any effort that I know of. They keep that tight. No, there was never even an item in the news, the fact that in that air-ground maneuver in Benning, that we had a man killed. Well, that's friendly fire. Hell, it can't be anything else but friendly fire. That's one I'd like to see somebody do something with. Maybe somebody could delve through history and come up with a report of all, my God, in the Civil War, I'm sure there were horrendous cases of that when they were firing at such close range.
Yeah, and you can't, they didn't have radio communications even to say, hey, you know, this is us out here.
Right.
I was wondering, when you were talking about the nature of the fighting in North Africa, was the fighting in Sicily similar or different?
Very different from the engineering standpoint. The 1st Division landed at Gala. The 3rd Division was on our left, and the 45th was on our right. And then the British were up at the center of the island, on the east side. Forgotten the name of the town. I mean, this has been a few years ago. Our job, initially, and of course Patton had command of the whole ring-a-ding-doo.
7th Army.
7th Army. I think it's called the 7th Corps then. And by this time, Allen had been replaced by, his name slipped my mind. He was very good, though. He was excellent. Hubner. He's very good. He's an excellent job. And he,
What did the guys think when Terry Allen was removed from command?
they didn't quite, at least the best I could feel. I thought that Terry was not a disciplinarian enough during out of combat. He was a damn good combat officer. I'll give him that 100%. But when we were out of combat, he just, I guess he was planning for the next step, but he didn't seem to pay any attention to what was going on in the division from then on. And there were some nasty things that happened.
For example,
Oh, just drunken brawls. And antagonism between divisions. This really started in Camp Blanding because the 36th and the 1st were there. And the 36th, I think, originally was a National Guard unit. And their discipline was nil. And the 1st and the 36th, here you had a real Yankee division and a real Texas division, and whenever they'd get in town together, and it was just that sort of thing. And of course, all the 1st Division wore the Porter-Jair, and the Texans ridiculed it, and there you had a good reason for a fight, and it just was not a good thing. And I don't think Allen gave that much thought. He just figured that's the way the Army was, and that's the way it was always going to be.
tough bunch of boys.
Mm-hmm. As long as they fought well, he didn't really care, I don't think. And they fought well. The 1st Infantry always had a reputation of doing its job and doing it well, even with the tremendous casualties it took. We'll go on and to compare Sicily with Africa. Our job, the 1st Division's job, was to cut the island in half. Its final destination was a little called Cefalu. I don't know whether you've heard of it. Well, as we started up that, and the good roads in Sicily, but they're very narrow. And they're carved out of mountains, you might say, just hill after hill after hill after hill, bridge after bridge after bridge. When we started out, my company was, well, it was supposed to be a regiment, no, a battalion of light tanks, honey tanks. Have you ever heard of those? Oh, Lord, you could penetrate them with a 50 caliber. And they were scared to death. I think they only had a 37 millimeter gun on them. They had a small gun. And they were scared to death of mines. So the colonel in command of it was supposed to be the lead unit. Commanded that the engineers in front. Actually, I think he just wanted a target vehicle. Well, we had half tracks. I guess you knew that. There was 3 half tracks to each company. They originally mounted 30 calibers. Well, 30 caliber wasn't worth a damn. And I managed to get a moonlight requisition so that I had 250s on every one of my tracks. They escape mounts, so they ended up 250s, 230s. Now, that took care of most everything, anti-aircraft. And when we tangled with Italian tanks, our 50s would go right through those Italians, just like they'd go through our honeys. They didn't have, their tanks weren't worth a damn. But to go on, I guess we built close to 50 bridges or bypasses before we even got halfway up the cotton-picking island. The Germans blew every bridge, and they left a covering force of Italians, which, a funny one, I think, forgotten the name of the little town. There was a good-sized bridge blown out. And I went out to make a reconnaissance. That's the first time I got hit. Make a reconnaissance to see, crawling out to see how bad this was. Now here I had a whole regimental combat team in line behind me. And we were still getting, I mean, the Germans still had air supremacy. We weren't getting any particularly. Occasionally you'd see an American plane, but usually there would be a German on his tail when he was getting out of there. The Germans had some pretty good planes in those days. What we saw mostly was a plane I'd worked on at Lockheed called a P-38. You've ever heard of it? Twin boom job? Now, I'm not asking these questions of you indicating that you don't know. I just don't know whether you know. Anyway, I started getting machine gun fire from over at the hill. And I'd gone out in the track, and they answered with 50 caliber. And they knocked out one gun, the other one must have been dug in. The 50s, I could see, you know, we had also swiped aircraft ammunition for the 50s, you know, that has one tracer, 2 armor piercing, and 2 incendiaries in every 5 rounds. So that makes it a real good ground ammunition also. I think of some of the things we did that you wouldn't have recognized the company against the TO&E that was set out, because we did everything we could to take care of things. If it wasn't issued, we'd steal it. And incidentally, the few times I've run into Marines, I've realized that is their operating philosophy. I don't think their TO&E gives them anything. I think they just steal everything. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, squad, I had Lieutenant Johnson at the 1st platoon. I said, George, take squad down and get that Italian unit. I thought there'd be maybe a squad down there. So we had what we did is we cut bypasses around. These were normally just dry waddies, as we learned to call them in Africa. That hung on. You never talked about ditches and ravines over waddies. So we cut a twist down and then a twist up the other. We had good big dozers, D8s. So we practically had the forward slope taken care of. And George hadn't come back. Couldn't figure out what in the world happened. I was just starting to go down and make a recon and get big jeep down and get down there. And here he came. He had 200 Italians. He'd taken 8 men down there. And he hadn't even disarmed them. They came up pulling their little mortar carts behind them. They just brought them up on the road and waved them on back to where the MPs were. They'd catch them and disarm them. So it was really funny. About every 20 men, there would be one engineer soldier with an M1, and here's all the Italians with the rifles on their shoulders coming up, marching just like they were a part of the unit.
For you, the war is over.
I think they just gave us fire to let us know they were there. So.
You said that this was about this time you got wounded the first time?
Yeah, what happened, they were firing 20 millimeter. And, you know, that has explosive rounds.
Yeah.
Well, I felt a ping. I thought it just caught my trousers. And later my Jeep driver says, Captain, what the hell's wrong? You really get you first aid. What happened is a flick of this had gone into me. It wouldn't bother me. I didn't even turn it first aid. I opened my own pack, put something over my head. Never thought any more about it. I was back here in the States, and I got this was well after the war, got what I thought was a boil on my right heel. Went down to, can't think of his name now, I know him as well as I do my own. He was a paratrooper, doctor, can't think. John Cruz. He'd been a paratrooper officer during the war. He was a doctor. We used him as a doctor. You don't know whether you know their name or not. He was a tough, good doctor. Now, I went down to have him lance that boil. And he did it right in his office there. He had a, sort of example. And he hit something, I thought it was an electric shock. was a piece of 20 millimeter ammunition that had worked from my hip all the way down and come out my heel. It was about as big as your fingernail. He said, my God, where'd that come from? I said, well, I got hit up here. He said, I'd never heard of such a thing. Have you ever heard of it?
Yes, I've heard that can happen. It works its way.
How does it get down through you?
I don't know.
I mean, a piece as big as, about half of your little fingernail.
That's a pretty good sized piece of metal.
It sure is. How does it get down through the body? Anyway, we spent time after time. Oh, then we ran out of Atterbury. And we were having trouble getting supplies. And half my company went down with malaria. Well, this place got infected on me since I hadn't done anything about it. And I got malaria. And I have no idea how I left Sicily. I was down to 17 men. I had 21 vehicles, 28 counting my heavy vehicles. I didn't have enough men to drive a cotton-picking vehicle. I was down with malaria, and I was yellow as a Chinese. And this hip was giving me hell. I just turned in 11th field, and I don't ever remember anything else until I woke up in Africa. I woke up in Algiers in a hospital. Well, I was there about 2 months, I guess. The outfit was still in Sicily. And there were rumors that it was going to move. So I went AWOL from the hospital. As soon as they fed me, I was back. I got down to 123 pounds. And my normal weight at that time was 185. So you can see I was a walking skeleton. Yellow as a chick. Eyes yellow, fingernails purple. You ever seen anybody with malaria? It ain't pretty. And they'd gotten me up to about 150. I went AWOL. I just bought, I'd gotten in fatigue. We wore fatigues in Sicily. And somehow my dog tags had gotten messy. And all I had on was a pair of dirty fatigues. And they put me in the enlistment for it until I couldn't do it. Anyway, I spent about a month and a half, 2 months there.
Were you captain by that time?
I was a captain by that time. And in fact, I'd been offered the S3 slot. And I said, no, thank you. I don't, you know, the S3 is operations officer.
Operations officer.
And I had seen several battalion and regimental commanders who had had bad losses. Of course, they were replaced right quickly, but they were getting to the point where they couldn't make a damn decision. One thing about a company, if you make a decision, you're right there and you're going to catch it with everybody else. And again, you talk about information. You get so little information and so little that you can really depend on that you make your decisions usually on by the seat of your britches is what it amounts to. But the thing about it, if you're in it, okay, I made a bad decision, but we got out of it. Whereas up at battalion and regimental, they make a decision, and they don't know what's going on half the time out there. And if it's a bad one, you'll lose a lot of people.
Somebody else pays the price.
That's right. And they get to the point where they start weighing the odds on what they should do, and they can't make up their minds really. And that's the worst thing you can do. They'll make a decision and then rescind it. And in the Army, that should never, never happen. You make a decision and you go with it. Let's hope it's the right. Okay.
You got back to the first division.
I went AWOL. I got on a bomber run. And we went over and bombed Germany. And they were supposed to land and refuel in Sicily. They didn't do it. They partially shot up, and they just made it to the nearest airfield, which was in Egypt. So here I am in Egypt. I'm AWOL, I don't know how I'm going to get out except to bum a ride, which I did. And finally I caught a C-47 that had been handling paratroop drops, and it landed, or actually what happened is it didn't land. It was supposed to land in Sicily. But coming across the Mediterranean, there was a German fighter that apparently had been strafing in Africa. They got harassed by the Germans since Africa was no longer German territory. Often the troops got harassed by German fighters. Well, I was sitting in the, those bucket seats in those 647s, hooked some ordinary harness, snapped to the rings that the paratroopers used. And just sitting there half asleep when all of a sudden there was a tremendous explosion and a line of holes appeared in the fuselage up there. And this was piloted by a warrant officer, and then the sergeant is a co-pilot. And he told me that when they graduated from their air training, they just went down the list. Lieutenant, warrant officer, lieutenant, warrant officer. Apparently, I don't know how that worked anyway. He was a warrant officer. Sergeant came back and he said, Captain, you ever gone out in the chute? I said, hell no, I've never been in a chute before. He said, let me show you how to get it on. I'd gotten a brand new khaki uniform. That's what riled me most. I got in the chute, and I said, well, no, I'll ride it on down. He pointed. He had one propeller feather, and I could see black smoke coming out of the engine. He says, we're not going to ride it. We're going to go out right after you. So I stood in that door. Ain't no way I'm going out this door. Next thing I know, I had a boot in the butt, and out I went. And it seemed to me ages before that damn chute opened, because it was on the line. And then it was just wonderful. You're just floating down, just looking all around, nothing going on, beautiful. Except that when he hadn't tightened up these straps on me, and when I hit, you can imagine what happened. Anyhow, until you got within about 50 feet of the ground, then that ground comes up like a freight train. And he told me to grab the shrouds and hit with bent knees and roll forward. I did, and the wind caught me. And it took the whole tail end of my brand new khaki trousers out. But as luck would have it, I saw their two chutes open and saw the plane headed toward the Mediterranean. I walked about 100 yards, jumped over on these low rock walls they have in Sicily. I looked, and here's a Jeep. You know, we had our bumpers painted, 1E, A, my company.
Your company, First Division,
First
Engineers,
A Company 23. I was within 5 miles of my company CP. So I went in, reported in, and they had kept they were in Pramble tent. They had kept my equipment right there, and it still had my bunk assigned to me. And
moved right back in.
Moved right back in, got into the uniform, they got out of these torn khakis, reported in, Colonel Guy. And again, he offered me exec officer then. And I told him, no, I'm going to stay with you. So
about that time, had you heard yet that you were going to move? And
no idea. All transportation had been frozen. So they were getting ready. That is all sea transportation. Yeah. They were getting ready for the. I thought we would probably make the Italian invasion. No, it's just I'd been in the first engineer, was comfortable as a company commander, and I figured this thing was going to go on forever, and I guess I was just like a horse. I mean, I was so used to what I was doing that, you know, you see horses that are well trained that you unhook their halter and they walk out and stand right there ready to be harnessed for draft horses. That's about the way I was, I guess. So we went back to England.
How did the guys feel when they understood that they were probably going to be leading another landing force in?
You know, at that time, they just accepted it.
Here we go again.
Here we go again, same old crap, you know. I mean, you get into a certain way of thinking, and that's it. I mean, after all, that's been my life for almost 2 years now.
Except this time you were going to go ashore at Omaha Beach.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know it at the time I was going there. You know, we had beautiful photographs of the area. I showed you those. We knew exactly. I knew where I was going to go exactly, and I wouldn't have given you 2 cents in hell for my chances of any of my entire unit living through that. You study those pictures, and you see what you were faced with. I mean, supposedly we were going to get bombs on the beach, which would have given us some protection, because they were sitting up, 150, 200 feet above us, with concrete emplacements, mortar, pillboxes, wire, big anti-tank ditch. What's your chances? Yeah. And we went in, and of course this is our first daylight invasion.
Just dawn, 6:30.
I believe I went in at 0700, yeah.
The sea pretty rough.
Oh yes, the sea had been, in fact they had thought that they might even cancel the damn thing.
They put it off a day.
Put it off a day, yeah. It was supposed to be the 5th, and it went on the 6th. And my men know, by that time, you couldn't have phased them with anything. They were seasick, but they puke and get right back to whatever they were supposed to be doing.
What was the company's job?
Our job was to open exit E1 at Omaha Easy Red. That pin down things for you?
That narrows it about as much as it can be.
Yeah. And that, on the flank of it was where that pillbox was. It was giving us such a hell when we landed. Well, my company wasn't due in until 7:30. I went in at 0700 so I could get a pretty good idea of how accurate the pictures I had, if there'd been any changes. And as luck would have it, apparently they had moved a German unit to right where we were going to land. And it was sheer randomness from what I'm able to tell. Because I think Hitler was convinced we were going to land at Calais. And anyway, as soon as I went ashore, I had a nasty situation take place in briefing camp. My first sergeant and one of my platoon sergeants, you know, we were fenced in and we were not to leave that area. Got picked up by the MPs outside of the briefing area. Well, I was mad enough to bite nails. Here are two of my senior NCOs that I really depended on. Well, while we were in England, we were in a little town called Charlotte. It was the mouth of the Char River, supposedly where William the Conqueror had landed, or so a big plaque said. Anyway, they'd gotten to know lots of the girls in Charlotte, and we were there for quite a while, 6 months, I guess. And apparently these girls, we were down and gotten down on the coastline. And these girls had come all the way from Charlotte to see these boys, and they went AWOL. And went out in the briefing area. Well, I busted them right on it. And because the idea was that if they had been picked up by German agents, which they assumed were there, they would have spilled the beans on everything. I busted them, and I made my first sergeant, I made him my runner, and I was just going to take a radio operator myself first. I made him a runner to go in with me, and I told him, I said, you have just signed your death warrant. And I said, my God, I don't think we stand a chance, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's our best chance. Well, I was going to make Moore, who was a platoon sergeant, also a runner, but his platoon commander, Johnson, said, oh, you're the best platoon sergeant in the whole damn division. I said, Captain, I said, I'm going to bust his butt, but I'll make him your runner. I don't want you to give him any authority at all. But that's what saved his neck, because my radio operator and runner were both killed immediately. And I got hit. And when I had my field glasses, you went in with all this damned equipment on. You had your map case, your gas mask, your field glasses. And then around the whole mess was this May West, so that you just lumbered through. What happened, the ramp got hit coming in, and we had to go over the side. So we were in water up to here. Chest coming in. And in fact, we had Coast Guard. We had American landing craft there, the Coast Guard commander. He left and went back on another ship. Anyway, I got hit in the field glasses. Went through the field glasses, of course. I didn't know this until I woke up. Went through the field glasses, and you got a metal rim case, and you got two pieces of metal where the field glass itself, and then out through the metal rim pad, and then just rode this rib out. Didn't penetrate.
One came along the rib.
Right, but the impact knocked me colder than Karen.
Were you still in the water when that happened, or were you?
I was. The tide was coming in. I was in the sand, deep sand, and heading for what the big wrong thing I should have. The big pole out there with had the mines on, which would be covered by water at high tide. And tide was coming in fast. There was a shale bank there. I don't know, sort of rubble. I was headed for, but in that deep sand, I wanted to hit the first cover I could get. And I came to the water washing the back of my neck. I couldn't move my left arm or my left leg. Oh, geez, I wonder, the feeling is, how bad are you hit when you first wake up? And you're scared to death to reach and find out where is that a big hole or a little hole? So, and since I couldn't move my left leg or my left arm, I thought it was pretty bad. Well, turned out that, when your arm's asleep, those real jingly pains that come in it when it starts to wake up, I had things like that on there were about 2 million times as great. I thought this leg and arm were going to come off. But it turned out the first car, all I got was just a streak across here. And that was my Purple Heart. I never did report the other ones.
How long was it before you got enough movement back so that you could take care of yourself at all?
Oh, actually, I sat up as soon as I got water at the back of my base of my neck. My helmet was off. We didn't wear our straps down. We wore them on around behind. Big arguments of whether a shell blast would break your neck or if you'd lose your helmet. It was 6 of one, half dozen the other. So I looked, and there were bodies there just floating in the water, and I could see my radio operator. He had gotten it bad, and I couldn't see the first sergeant at all, but I later found him. He had gotten it pretty bad, too. Anyway.
Did they die of their wounds, or did they make it?
We don't know. No, they died.
They died.
I don't know whether the rounds killed them, but they were floating in the water, so they could have drowned.
Must have been hard to see people you knew that well.
Oh, hell, yes. I mean, I was worried if I knew my troops would be coming in soon. I didn't know. I'd lost track of time, but my watch was still working. And they came in, but what was holding us up? We lay along that shale bank, which gave us protection from the, I guess it was 88 millimeter gun that brazier of the pillbox. A destroyer came in. He couldn't have been 200 yards off beach, and he pumped 4 rounds right into that brazier. We saw him go right in there. Boy, that was the end. And then things just started moving fast. Everything came to life.
You must have been real pleased to see that destroyer.
Oh boy, I loved the Navy from then on. I had been cussing them for years because I'd been in and off of, as I say, my trip home on a ship called Christopher. Everybody called it Crystal Ball because it was so slow. It took us 2 months to get from La Havre to Patrick Henry. Anyway, my troops came in right about that time. I could see them coming up. They landed them on the wrong beach, as usual. Things got all fouled up, always in every one of those situations. Anyhow, we got the only exit open on D-Day, and they funneled everything through us.
E1?
E1, exit E1. Here's a... What was that? I don't know.
But you saw your people coming in.
Right. They were coming up the beach, and they had come in on LST. The whole company was together.
So they were under fire, but they were coming up to where they were supposed to be.
Well, the fire, no, with that pillbox knocked out.
Not so bad.
Not so bad, no. They were getting fire from, well, it'd be from the east, from those troops. They landed without too much trouble.
They had enough demolition charges and stuff to
And
do the job?
the reason they came in on LST, they brought their vehicles with them.
Uh-huh.
And they were loaded with demolition equipment.
Uh-huh.
There was a bulldozer there. I don't know who belonged to it.
Further question on Normandy.
All right.
Were you badly enough wounded so that you couldn't take command of the company, or you were?
Never left the company. By the time the battalion was there, they got in shortly after we did, and Colonel Garrett took over the command of the battalion completely, and of course assigned the company's various duties. Our duty was to knock out the openings into the various fields with their dozer, and to also put out direction, because a lot of the adjacent troops came through our exit and then turned right to get back into their area and were behind the Germans. So it worked out very well. Now, in fact, the only reason that I received that Purple Heart is because the doctor insisted, we had a surgeon, a retired surgeon, insisted that I be given a physical examination when he heard about it. I was badly bruised up through here, but that was all.
Lucky those field glasses were there.
It sure as hell was. Just amazing. Well, I've been sort of just rambling
No,
on.
this is exactly what I want to hear about.
Okay.
When you were doing your engineer duties,
Mhm.
opening that exit and
Right.
opening the hedges, did you have infantry support, or were you?
Infantry had moved on through us by this time. They had landed ahead of us, but hadn't gotten very far.
Couldn't get out the exit.
Could get out. They didn't have any support, no artillery, no anything, except naval artillery, and that's not very accurate. You can't work as close as you can with the normal artillery. We got to the point You know, the same regimental combat teams got together all the time. And the artillery battalion with us was the 7th Field Artillery. And by that time, their tubes in their guns were so worn, you know, there's a compression band that band never got pulled tight, and you could hear it go. That's how we knew who the hell was firing for us, because it was the 7th Field. I think later they got all their guns replaced so that you couldn't recognize them anymore. But the expansion band was swirling around there, gave it a sound that you could recognize. Okay, 7's there. And we got to working so closely, I often operated as a forward observer. They didn't even bother to send us a forward observer because I had, the way I worked, I don't know whether it was the way the artillery is supposed to or not, but when I saw a lucrative target, I'd say, poop me one out. And they'd usually smoke out. And I'd say, okay, you're 200 yards to the right and 50 under. Next round be right on, then they'd fire for effect. So didn't need a forward observer. We had, by that time we'd gotten the new radios.
Murphy, 101 Maple Lane, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, 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 Oak.
They'd work only half of the time.
SCR 506.
That sounds
Yeah.
real, SCR.
I was in a radio unit for a while.
Well,
in
you
the National
know.
Guard, but we
Had
probably-
these huge things that took up half of a Jeep back. You had to have a radio operator there. You couldn't handle them yourself because they were drifting off and they
Yeah,
were
you probably had the PRC 10s,
yeah,
this size.
right.
Yeah, packed on the back.
Back on the back.
With a handset.
Handset. That was the type of radios that we
Whip
brought
antenna.
in. A whip antenna on them, right. That was the one type that we brought in Normandy, and that was what my radio operator was carrying. And boy, it was good. And it had multiple channels on it. You could get in a command channel or artillery channel or whatever. Now you always got a good SOI. I will say for the division, operation and planning under Hubner was better than Allen's. Everybody thought very highly of Allen, and they didn't.
He was a fighter.
He was a fighter, he was. And his his assistant division commander was General Roosevelt. And he was a character if there ever was one. You'd find him prowling the front lines. He always wore his helmet on backwards, and the officers had a vertical white stripe on the back of their helmet, and the NCOs had a horizontal white stripe. And you'd see this guy coming along here with a white stripe on the front of his helmet, and it turned out to be General Roosevelt. And in the middle of nowhere, he'd come up, and I'd hear a quiet voice say, "Well, how you getting along, son?" He really prowled the front lines. Wonderful man. He later commanded the 4th Division, I think. Ivy had the four leaf closer.
Shoulder pad. The fighting in Normandy, once you got off the beach,
Sporadic. You didn't know what you were running into. We got up to, I got to name a little town, but it had been shelled very heavily by naval, and there were fires there. I remember one of my units one of my platoons, the water was out, so they used a vat of wine to put the damn fire out. It was green wine. Put the fire out. I can probably dig and remember the name of that town, but that we were told to hold up at that point. We were 50 miles, stuck out on a salient. And we held up for a month before the rest of the divisions came up alongside us and moved forward. Then we were attached to 3rd Army when Patton came in. The 1st Division was attached to 3rd Army then. And Patton's, well, he was supposed to, before he landed, his headquarters was there. And they had the 2nd Armored and the 1st Armored in that organization. They were supposed to go to Brest, knock out the submarine pens.
Yeah, out into Brittany there.
Yeah. Instead, his second in command, I've forgotten his name, found out that there was nothing to the east. So he started that big race across France. And we were in that whole mess. They had motorized it. They'd gotten trucks for the infantry. They were driven by quartermaster people. And boy, we'd make 50 miles a day.
Did you get down to Paris?
Yes, but in fact, we were supposed to invade Paris. By that time, we were out there was really nothing much. And instead, they held us up and sent a French division in.
Yeah, Leclerc in the 2nd French Division.
Right.
2nd Armored.
And Lord, they didn't hardly get beyond the outskirts before everybody was off in town drinking wine and having a ball.
Not surprising.
Well, I've just rambled here. Am I?
Oh no. That's I'm interested in what was the countryside like in Normandy before you broke out.
If you can imagine, instead of having wire fences, you have a hillock that may be it's of earth pushed together, maybe 4 to 6 feet tall, and on top of that hedge, growing up the sides and on top of it, and that's hedgerow country. Very narrow roads between, and in fact, they were so narrow that a distance and a half going through there would scrape on both sides. The hedges. Well, of course, we were kept busy just knocking holes in these hedgerows, and Germans would just move one hedgerow back. And then you had to make another attack. It may be 200 yards. I mean, like a normal pasture. And it was like just a continuous attack. And once we got that hedgerow, we knocked holes through it with a dozer, and then no problems getting around. But you had the next one to knock out. And that's where mortar fire really helped. They weren't good. They didn't have any artillery. They had mortars. And our infantry had a lot of these little 60s, not the 81s. And they turned out to be, at that close range, turned out to be very, very effective. But I have only vague memories of that. That was just crap work, you know.
Did your wound heal pretty well?
Oh, yeah. This, after they took care of me, the hip wound, they took care of me in Africa very well.
I was wondering about the chest wound.
It was just... it's only about that long. Just rode a rib.
Yeah, I thought maybe with what it went through, it carried some stuff along with it.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Good.
He may be still in there for all I know.
There probably is no way to tell exactly, but the company that you started with in North Africa,
Mhm.
200 men or 185, a
Yeah.
couple of hundred men, by the time, say, you got to Paris or
We really didn't know. We just had passes to Paris.
Yeah, but I mean, I was wondering how many people.
I had, say roughly a 200-man county overage. I had better than 2,800 men go through that company.
That's
I had 7 officers in the company, including myself. We had 35 officers go through it. I stayed in command of it except for the time I was in the It wasn't until after the war that I took the S3 job.
But that many men, replacements for.
Not all dead.
No, no, of course. Wounded.
Wounded, ill, transferred out. But we still had, I'd say, at least 20% of the original ones that started clear back in Devon.
But they were there at the end.
There at the end.
That's probably a higher percentage than in some companies that were left.
Uh-huh. Well, they get wounded, or they get sick, and they do the same thing I did. They go AWOL and come back to the unit. They didn't go through the rifle depots and get sent to other units.
Because you could trust those people that you knew. Or
What's the old saying? I'd rather have a devil I know than a stranger one.
Yeah. Where did you end the war?
In Czechoslovakia, down at Cheb, Czechoslovakia. I think that was the German name of it. You know, they had knocked down all the signs and put up their own. Char, where did your China, remember I was in Czechoslovakia, I've forgotten the name of the town, but we called it Cheb?
I don't know whether it's pronounced that way.
That's the way we pronounce it. I was actually, we had gotten into Marienbad, to Carlsbad. We'd gotten into Carlsbad, but that was beyond the line that had been drawn, and we were pulled back to Marienbad, which was further west. We had sporadic fights, but not much. And mostly we just took over the town, made them tear down all the road obstacles, and just organized it, get the utilities in order, back in electrical and sewage and water back in operation.
So the engineers were doing that kind of thing as
Oh,
well.
sure. Well, the way we did it is that I had complete command of the town. I just go up and talk to the burgomaster and tell him that I wanted this in, and there would be an officer or enlisted man assigned to see that it got done, and if it wasn't done by a specific time, he and his staff would be out there doing it. Boy, I just got things done like that. Once we were in Germany, we didn't hesitate to kick people out of even towns in Aachen. We just kicked them out of their apartments and put my men in decent living conditions. We quit living in the field.
So you crossed the Rhine somewhere near Aachen?
Oh, well, no, Aachen is way before the Rhine.
Yeah, but you were up in that area.
Yeah, up in that area, yeah. I came home for a 30-day leave.
When was that?
Oh, Jesus.
Before the Battle of the Bulge or after? Or?
No, it was just before the Battle of the Bulge, because we were held in Paris. You had to have been overseas 2.5 years wounded once, decorated twice to be eligible for this 30 days. And I brought home 750 men. Here I was, just a captain in command of 750 men from every unit under the sun. Didn't even have a list of who they were. Had no trouble. I organized them into companies, officers and men. And you'd have thought we'd been organized for years.
Well, these are veterans, you know. They know what's.
They know what the score is. And then I never even reported in to Oglethorpe. I stayed in Atlanta in the Henry Grady Hotel. My wife came down and met me, and we had a wonderful time. I never did report in, and they gave me orders that we would catch such and such a train. I said, I'm not moving a foot until I get a list of who the hell I'm supposed to have. Says I've never even had a roll call. And about a week later, I had a roll call or an assembly in the lobby of the Henry Grady every morning at 8 o'clock. It was funny. The Atlanta people just turned inside out to make us welcome. They really did. We went into places that were just absolute mansions.
Imagine the 30 days went pretty quickly.
It did, but because I insisted on having a roll call, I never had one coming over. I didn't know who the troops were. No idea. I just had organized them. I didn't even know all the officers' names. They just assumed since I was a senior officer that they followed orders. I mean, you got so you knew them by face, but you couldn't have called their name to save your neck. They left. Charlotte was down there when we finally did load up. And the men had been on the town. Then one of them came out and they had two bags, the A bag and the B bag, you know, the whole bit. And one of them was just rubber legged. He was so drunk. And we got on the train there. There was a siding, which we later got tied on to a regular train, a scheduled train. But I called him to attention. This one got his A bag on, or tried to get his B bag on, he crumpled and went to the ground. And these two buddies lifted him back up. Well, they got him on the train. And when we stopped in Atlanta, this was outside of Atlanta, stopped in Atlanta to get tacked onto the train, I was in the compartment signing off the conductor all the, the regular, what the hell they call them, warrants, I guess. And Prestridge, one of the officers I knew, I was the only armed officer, had a 45, came back, he says, Captain, look out the window. I looked out the window. Here this drunk had gotten off the train. And the MPs had gotten him. My whole train was following right behind him. I got out there and I stopped the MPs. I said, what do you intend to do with this man? He said, well, we're going to take him in. I said, you get your officer. I will stay at this hole right here. This poor little second lieutenant came out. And he says, Kevin says, we're going to have to put this man in jail. I said, you're going to turn him over to me. Can't do that, sir. I said, take a look around. By that time, my crowd was around me. Said, all I've got to do is nod my head. You'll be knocked in the head and put in a barracks bag. You'll end up in Europe. Now, do you think you turn him over to me? He said, yes, sir. I'll be very happy to sign him over to you. I got a report on that after I'd been back with the unit a month later. Requesting what disciplinary action had been taken. You know what I wrote on it? Following named officer has been restricted to the company area for 2 weeks. Signed, Charlie Murphy. Sent it back to him. Never heard another word out of it.
I'm wondering how it felt to know that you were going back to the war after you'd been out of it.
We were requested. It wasn't ordered, but we requested to sign a paper saying we would return to our unit before we left our units. I was offered, a friend of mine, or one of the officers I'd known by the name of Gordon, had gotten real chummy at Belvoir with the commanding officer there. And he had sold him on the idea that I was a mine expert. Johns was his name, General Johns. And he had me come meet Johns, come down to Belvoir. I was here in Knoxville. And we had some good parties there, too. Anyway, Johns wanted me to come in to teach mine warfare. And I told him that I had signed this paper. And he said, oh, we can take care of that. Never happened.
The war was still obviously going to go on for a while.
Oh, sure.
Did you, at what point did you think that you were going to make it through to the end?
I don't think I ever.
Yes, especially, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, the Germans had changed those names, and
Right.
it was called Cheb.
Right. Settled in the Czech Republic.
Mhm.
Very down.
I don't know. I don't really believe that crossed my mind. The only time I got upset about orders, I was on leave in. I'd been transferred. They were rearranging the whole situation. I got transferred to the 99th Division, and they were reconstituting the 1st Division on troops that newly arrived troops, and transferring those that had the number of points. I think it was some number like 75 required, and well, hell, I had 175. I went to the 99th Division and was supposed to be the engineer battalion commander, and I said, didn't want it. I've become assistant engineer because that gave me all the freedom. And I was down in Cons, put myself on leave for a month in Cons. And when we heard that the bomb had exploded, this was what, August?
Yeah, 45, August.
Yeah. But the reason I had accepted moving into the 99th Division was the fact that the rumor was real damn strong that the 1st Infantry was going to lead the invasion in Japan. And the G2 estimates were at that time ranging from 2 million to 3 million Americans to be killed, and God knows 8 million Japanese. I mean, it came out and factual, just like any other army. You know, all the estimates you got before every battle. And that's when I really got thoroughly disgusted and said, the hell with the whole damn mess. I've had enough. With the exception of that 30-day leave, I'd been overseas for 3.5 years. And when I laugh with these Desert Storm troops fussing about being overseas for 6 months, and far as the British were concerned, some over there 5 and 6 years. And
So enough was enough.
yeah, enough was enough. It just got to the point that when I got back, I could have stayed in the regular army and just had the hell with it. I'm going to get in the reserve. In fact, it gave me several offers to stay with increased rank.
Does your company A, have reunions or?
Amazing. Let me tell you about that. Well, first there is a society of 1st Division officers.
1st Division officers.
I've attended several of those. Then our own battalion, the 1st Engineer Battalion, has its own reunions. And this was brought about not by the officers, because by that time the officers had been going to other units, you know, and although they still had good memories at first, they had other responsibilities. And in fact, we just attended a reunion that was set up by the enlisted personnel of the 1st Engineer Combat Battalion in Virginia. Just when did we go to that 1st Engineer, the most recent one?
Year ago. It'll be a year in August or September.
Yeah. A wonderful time. But the further, what's more interesting, Company A of the 1st Engineer Battalion, the enlisted personnel have a reunion every year up in the Catskills. They'd been going on, I'd heard about it, been going on for about 3-4 years, when I got a written invitation to attend. Well, I was a little bit leery about going because I'd been a tough SOB, and I thought, uh-oh, this is going to be an opportunity for a little bit of... They treated Charlotte and I like we were the prince and princess of the Knoxville. I had a fellow had been a sergeant and had been a bulldozer operator to begin with, and I promoted him. He caught me at that reunion. This was up in the Catskills, lovely place up there. In fact, it's in a town, I've forgotten what the name of it is now, but they had an Irish reunion up there, and they had shamrocks painted all over the roads. Anyway, this fella got me aside, and he said, "Captain, says, how you doing for money?" Well, of course, by that time, I was a light colonel. I was doing all right, working here at Oak Ridge. I said, "Doing fine." He said, "Well, says, I'd let you have about $200,000, you wouldn't have to pay it back." I said, "Well, thanks a hell of a lot." I said, "Really, I couldn't accept that kind of a gift." And he said, "Well, I've got some ties." It turns out he was tied with the mafia in New York, and he had all the richest plums and had a huge construction business. But he apparently remembered some of the things that I had done, and he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I never had anything hit me so strongly before. But apparently 200,000 wasn't much to him, see.
Interesting.
It was extremely interesting. They treated us just wonderfully, and they still have this meeting every year, and they keep up. I keep getting newsletters. And Johnson, who I mentioned, has kept a newsletter going for years up until last year. I think he's quit, but I don't know. He and a fellow by the name of Barnum, who also was one of my platoon men. It ended up, everybody but the battalion commander had been in A company, that all of the companies, and were in the staff position. And Garrett told me, he said, "Murphy, you've got a knack of training officers. look at who has a company."
Well, that pretty well covers the ground, I think.
I think so.
For now, anyway.
Hope I haven't been too windy.
No. Is there anything else that you want me to know about the war?
The World War.
This is going to be around a long time.
Yeah. Well, as far as I was concerned, World War II was the last real honest war, if you can talk about one. I have never understood, and in fact I've written a novel about the effect of the politicians on the Army and how adverse that effect is. I've never understood why we get in the messes we get into. Due to political chicanery, I consider it. I don't know whether it's to foster the war marketing thing or what it is. I vaguely believe that a lot of these wars had a lot of that in them. More planes, more ammunition, and keep the people busy, and keep the whole situation going as far as the economy is concerned. Never understood it, but vaguely I've resented it. I never understood, well, I came close to resigning from the reserve when we got good strong rumbles that we were going to send troops to Rhodesia. Remember when that Rhodesian thing came up? I came with an ace of resigning my commission there. What in the hell would we be doing in Rhodesia? What were we doing in Korea? Can you tell me? You're a historian. Now we can turn this thing off. Maybe you can unload on me.
I'll tell you, before we do that, one of the things I want to do is to read the citation on your Silver Star here. I want to have that on the record, if that's okay. Citation for Silver Star, Charles E. Murphy, 0413695, Captain, Company A, 1st Engineer Combat Battalion. For gallantry in action in the vicinity of Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, Normandy, France, 6 June 1944. The courage and cool determination with which Captain Murphy directed engineer operations were responsible for the only beach exit cleared on D-Day. Although wounded, Captain Murphy carried out vital reconnaissance under intense fire and maintained constant supervision of the many elements of his command. His skill and gallant devotion to duty strongly influenced the success of the invasion. Residence and appointment, Hollywood, California. Citation for the Silver Star.